Conversations on Effective Conservation with Luis Ortiz-Catedral, from New Zealand to Galapagos.
This is the second audio on the experience of Luis Ortiz-Catedral working in conservation. In this case, Luis has just finished his PhD, which he did in New Zealand, and he starts a new position in Galapagos Island, Galapagos National Park in Ecuador. So he starts working there first in a technical position, and then he's offered a kind of senior position as a manager of a team of 15 people. And he finds out that he has to manage this team, having to write lots of reports, but almost no funds. And he talks about his experience of what to do with how to keep the team, but also there was a conflict between the NGO where he was working and the national park team. That's a classic conflict between an NGO and a government office. But he describes in a very interesting way how he was able to establish effective collaboration with the national park team, even though his more kind of scientifically experienced bosses, they were not able to establish that in spite of having a much better academic curriculum. So kind of the interesting thing of this second chapter is how you see Luis developing a personality and a kind of a personal framework of how to work, where he starts seeing himself more as a facilitator between groups that a classic coordinator telling his people what to do, and how he is able to cross boundaries between organizations to work with other people, with other groups.
So after my PhD finished, and well, in the end, my thesis consisted of 13 published papers. It was just stapling them and handing them.
It's a lot.
It sounds like a lot, but still, some people were not convinced because they weren't papers in high-ranking journals. They were notes, natural history, that sort of thing. But again, I realized that's what I wanted to do. I wasn't interested in getting a paper in science or nature. I was more interested in being in the field. After that experience with the PhD, I was invited to help coordinate some of these translocations of parakeets. And in fact, the way we did it became the blueprint to reintroduce this particular species to 7 different localities across the country. Jorge was talking about cross-pollinating, and I think that was kind of the situation. You know, on my last 2 months in New Zealand, I volunteered for a reintroduction of the same species to another site. And I didn't arrive saying, oh, I know how to do it, I'm the leader. But people were coming to me like, oh, how do we do this? And, you know, we're having this problem. And I'll be like, okay, try this worked for us. So developing that kind of reference material and I guess a management plan of sorts was also very reassuring for me. And I realized that's what I wanted to go, rather than a purely academic career, okay? So after my PhD, I think I handed in June, and around early July, there was an ad for a position in the Galapagos Islands. And they required a person with experience leading teams, with experience in translocations, and who spoke Spanish and English. And I thought, well, if that isn't for me, I don't know who is it for. So I sent my CV, got an interview. I remember having the interview in the middle of another translocation that we did later, because it was so successful that then, you know, there was a demand for more translocations. And I went to Galapagos. I arrived there in 2010. The original idea was to figure out how to move a mockingbird, the mockingbird that inspired Charles Darwin on the theory of evolution, from one island to another. So it sounded kind of similar to my PhD. Except this was a system I didn't know, a group of islands I had not been to, people that I didn't know. Speaking the language was an advantage, but you know, it was only part of the story. And then within about 10 months, I was offered a junior position in the management team because the person who was there left. And
for the national park?
No, this is for the Charles Darwin Foundation. And I remember thinking, well, I'm not obliged to take this opportunity, but it will be a good sort of thing to have in your skill set. Oh boy, that was a, a very naive kind of decision, but it was, I guess I learned a lot. So overnight, I had 15 people to manage, multiple projects, and zero money. And we had to deliver reports to donors, performance reviews. People were worried about their jobs. So it wasn't what I thought was going to be. But I couldn't back out. I guess there was the option, you know, just to leave, but I was invested. And one of the lessons that I learned there was, because the advice that I had from other individuals was, well, you know, we can tell the donor for this project that, you know, the results are going to come up later and there was a setback and whatever. Bottom line, lying to the donor or pretending that you did something that we didn't do. And I remember talking to other colleagues and they said, you have to be transparent with donors. You cannot, your reputation is the only thing you have. Nobody cares about your papers. You know, it's your reputation, so protect that. So I listened to that advice, and the process of writing letters, emails, and then in person, explaining to donors that the $50,000 you gave us is not here anymore, and we haven't done the work. And that wasn't my doing. I was just there covering for whoever was there. That was tough. But you know what? For the most part, some donors closed the doors and said, well, that's unacceptable and bye. But the most important donor, the $50,000 one, well, the representative of this organization, she sat across from the table from me, asked me a lot of questions, took a moment to reflect and said, okay, do you think you can deliver if we give you more money? And I said, I'll certainly try. And so I've also carried that to this day. If you pretend that there isn't a problem, you are not going to fool your team or the donors. You're going to fool yourself. And that's a recipe for disaster. You know? So always, it's okay to admit there's failure. It's absolutely fine. We've all gone over or under budgets. But as long as you are honest about it, you actually show that you have credibility, you know? And that was definitely a very, very big lesson. I was asked to let go of people. And I remember we had an individual whose position was like $400 a month. For Galapagos, that's not a lot because it's a very expensive place to live. And I remember going to talk to him first to understand what the situation was. And he would be playing with his t-shirt, you know, looking down, and you could see he was vulnerable. He felt that, oh, he's going to axe me. That didn't feel good. And then what I thought was, well, we don't have money anyway. It doesn't make a difference. We're in the red. If we are a little bit more in the red, doesn't make a difference. So I only stayed in that position for a year and a half, but I fought tooth and nail not to let go of anyone. So everybody in the team that I was handed stayed employed for a year and a half. After I left, many were let go, but I thought, yeah, I don't want to do that because I didn't think it was the right thing to do. Here's the other very important lesson. The Charles Darwin Foundation at the time, is a very different thing right now, was at odds with the Galapagos National Park and the Ministry of the Environment of Ecuador. Essentially, there was a disproportion of highly qualified foreigners wanting to study the beak of the finch or whatever you want, which was at odds with the needs of the park. So I remember, because I became friends with some of the park rangers and we'll go for beers and play volleyball, whatever. And I remember talking to one of the deputy directors saying, well, look, we don't have any money for these projects. I've been asked to let go of people. I don't want to do that. And, you know, it's very challenging. He said, what do you need? He said, we'll help you. We have resources. So it was not just about the money. By talking to a colleague and respecting them and asking for their opinion, he came up with park rangers who would help us collect data. Their salary was already covered. so it was fine. He would lend us facilities in the park, computers, printers, you name it. So suddenly I went from, and the organizations are just, I don't know, 300-400 meters from one another, the offices. I ended up spending more time at the National Parks office than in my own office. But that relationship continues to this day. You know, that was 2011. To this day, I turn up in Galapagos and I can count on that support. So that lesson of creating bridges rather than
isolating yourself.
Yeah, and just thinking about what you want to do. That's another thing I wanted to talk on. Many people are good at describing the problem, and it can go on decades, and the problem receives fresh literature, more studies, and is the same problem. But now looking back, I think what I did just as an orange, by gut feeling rather than anything, was the problem is not going to change, but what are the circumstances around the problem? I cannot fix the problem, but the circumstances involve political willingness in the part of a public servant from the Minister of the Environment to help us. That was huge. It also involved the ability to say, well, we already lost face with all these donors. How about we try to make the best we can with the resources we have, and try to take the boat to safe shores, at least until I'm employed there, and that worked. I remember one of the projects was, the very project I was hired to do was closed. Like, well, we don't have any money, the birds are not going to be reintroduced, the mockingbirds. That's it, that's the end of the project. Then I talked to the park and they said, oh, we'll happily do it. You tell us, do you need letters of reference? We can connect you with donors. So it was, I guess it was just the ability to talk face to face with someone who understood the importance of these opportunities, So at an academic level, my superiors were published in Nature, in Science. Their CV, you could extend it and put a path of paper. But I don't think they were very pragmatic. So instead of, again, using that thing, instead of trying to convince someone, you just go sideways. I remember that, I would report on what was happening, but instead of putting an effort to try to make them see what was wrong with the situation, I just started working with another partner, with the Galapagos National Park. Because ultimately, the foundation, the role of an NGO is to help government departments fulfill certain duties, not the other way around, And I'm telling this because I understand it now, looking backwards, but right there in the moment, there was a lot of sneaky behavior, I guess, because I would attend meetings, I will send emails, I will prepare reports, but I knew deep down that didn't mean anything, that I really wanted to get support from the park. Does that answer your question? So it wasn't about challenging the authority that was telling me what to do. It was ignoring what they were telling me to do and then doing something else.
I suppose that in your pragmatic approach, there was a moment in which you did an analysis like, it's going to take me more energy to convince these guys who are great in what they do.
So smart, they cannot.
And they are so good that they will never get out of that comfort zone, that just moving to another partner that actually I can see eye to eye what we want to do, and I'm going to use my energy for that.
Exactly.
Instead of changing the minds of people who were very bright in what they were doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And how punk rock is that? You just tell them, yeah, sure, whatever, but then you go and do your own thing.